Malcolm! I start with the style of declamation and tone quality with which Malcolm always greeted me. He was a determined, irrepressible enthusiast with imagination, a sense of mission and purpose, and a musician of many parts. And you heard a moment or two ago from David Lane, who spoke so very eloquently of Malcolm's many and wide-ranging musical activities. Now I'd like to share with you a very few personal, random reminiscences. I cannot accurately recall exactly when, or indeed where, I first met Malcolm, but it must have been here in London, and it must have been in the mid to late 1980s. I do remember, however, our first conversation very quickly turning to Gloucester Cathedral, which proved to be our first common interest. Malcolm spent some years studying in Gloucestershire, where his main focus was his study of organ and composition with Dr. Herbert Sumption, the very long-standing and distinguished organist of Gloucester Cathedral, under whom I sang as a boy chorister. So over the years we had many conversations about Sumption, his music, his organ playing, his teaching, and indeed about the glorious architecture of Gloucester Cathedral. His experiences in Gloucestershire clearly made a very great impression on Malcolm, as indeed did his studentship at the Royal Academy of Music, where again we shared some experiences, some teachers and some friends. So these links formed the basis of our friendship, which began so many years ago and lasted for the rest of Malcolm's life. Malcolm's passion for everything Warlockian is well known, but perhaps less well known was his near hero worship of Herbert Sumption. So much was this the case that he even bought a car, I'm sure you'll remember it well, that could easily have been the twin brother of Sumption's very old Morris 1000 Traveller, or shooting breaker we used to call it. Malcolm's Morris, though highly polished, like Sumption's, was very, very old. It was not unknown for a wheel to drop off, or for the gearbox to grind to a halt, and breakdowns became increasingly frequent. But being the Morris fanatic that he was, Malcolm insisted on repairs rather than the purchase of a new car. Many times, like many others, I had the hair-raising experience of a ride in what Malcolm named the Sumption-mobile. Most of these rides began at the Royal Academy of Music, where Malcolm would meet me at 6:30 in the evening. He always arrived a little early and parked immediately outside the front door, much to the consternation and bemusement of the security staff, and announced himself as the chauffeur for Professor Wilde. We proceeded in the evening rush hour at a very sedately pace along the Marylebone and the Euston Road, for the Sumption Mobile had little power of acceleration, and the indicators were of the old semaphore type. You get the picture, I'm sure. Malcolm was a lover of fine food and wine, and on journeys along those roads, we invariably to the Little Bay in Farringdon, now sadly closed, or the Sacre-Cœur in Islington. We were always warmly greeted by the hosts, quickly seated, and the food and wine would be ordered after a careful perusal of the menu. Then began the real business of the evening. Malcolm would reach for his satchel, not a briefcase, mark you, a satchel, and brandishing various pieces of the latest memorabilia that he had acquired, which ranged from paper cuttings about Warlock to reports of the Three Choirs Festival, usually written by Felix Abrahamian, to reports of Sumption's organ recitals around the country. Having had a talk on one of these occasions about the various settings of Houseman's A Shropshire Lad, Malcolm reckoned that he had the music of a cycle that I wouldn't know, and he was right. This aroused my curiosity. Typically, at our next meeting, Malcolm produced the settings of A Shropshire Lad by C.W. Orr, the relatively little-known and much underestimated Gloucestershire composer. He very kindly gave me a copy, for which I remain very grateful. Those meals in the restaurant were always pleasant and jolly occasions, and always enhanced by Molly's presence. A moment ago I spoke of Malcolm's determination and enthusiasm, which could become an insistence on not taking no for an answer. And I'd cite just 3 examples of this that spring to mind today. Firstly, his involvement and enthusiastic encouragement of the authorities to consider the application for permission for the erection of a statue of Bela Bartok outside the South Kensington tube station. Secondly, his detective work and eventual discovery of the identity of Philip Heseltine's illegitimate son, who eventually acknowledged his parents in one of his articles in the London Evening Standard. Thirdly, his annual search for a venue and performers for the Warlock birthday concerts. On several occasions I received a request to organise one of these at the Academy. But the one of these of which I suspect he was most proud was the Warlockathon, as he called it, involving the recorded performances by the students of the Academy of the entire solo song output of Warlock. It took a whole day to accomplish and was curated and coached by Geoffrey Prattley, Malcolm's former piano accompaniment coach. The resultant CDs were an important document and for many years were the only source of recordings of the complete solo songs. Malcolm was a committed Christian and he had a deeply held faith. Each year he would visit his old haunts in Gloucestershire, taking in Plynwich, where he would stay at the Abbey for a few days' retreat to find peace, solitude and spiritual refreshment. It is good to know, and indeed appropriate, that Malcolm's ashes will be scattered in the grounds of Plynwich Abbey this weekend. These days, mention of Malcolm's name to those who knew him invariably brings a raised eyebrow, but a happy smile, as we recall an English eccentric and a kind Christian gentleman. I'm unable to think of a nicer epitaph than that.